I'd like to welcome you to this meeting of Council. This meeting will be live streamed and recorded, and the voices and images of those participating in the meeting and in the gallery may be captured as part of the recording. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet and pay our respects to elders past and present. As councillors, we have all taken an oath to carry out our duties in the best interests of the people of Indigo Shire and to do this in a fair and impartial manner. We are all committed to exercising the Council's powers and functions to the best of our skills and judgment. Do we have any apologies or leave of absence? Do we have any declaration of conflict of interest? We'll now go to open forum. There's a question from Barb Lowry, and there were some late questions put in by Jonathan. I certainly haven't got a copy of those questions. We'll take them on notice and you'll receive a written response to it, and they'll be in the minutes of this meeting.
Well, I was just wondering, because it was pretty short notice that I heard about this. Yeah,
this what meeting?
Well, the agenda of it. And I just wonder whether...
What do you mean late notice? It's been on since
I don't know, when it was put on...
Thursday?
Thursday last week, yeah.
The usual period of time. But we're quite happy to take them on notice, but not to hear them tonight. But you'll get a written response and they'll be in the minutes, and if you want to ask them again next month, more than happy to. Barb Lowry, do you want to stand up and ask a question? I just accidentally cut everybody off.
Thank you very much. My name is Barb Lowry. I'm a resident of Beechworth and I enjoy living here. My question is, in a feasibility study to replace a swimming pool, that consideration be given for a hydrotherapy or heated pool in Beechworth. I wrote to one of your council members and I felt the reply was perhaps inadequate. Many people in the community feel very strongly that there should be a hydrotherapy pool or a heated pool because it could accommodate so many people in our community. Not only senior people, young people, people who have are restricted in their exercise, people who have had surgery, people who need non-weight-bearing exercise. Residents of all ages, children, could benefit by such a pool. The council does provide funds and grants and facilities for both tourists and young people in preference to our seniors. A rail trail, I don't say deliberately in preference, they could alter that of course. A rail trail and mountain biking track is provided for young people here, plus many tourists. And these tourists really don't contribute much to our economy. If you go and ask retailers in the Shire, they will tell you that they contribute very little. It's we as ratepayers sustain this Shire. However, a lot of these activities, the rail trails and the mountain biking track, people don't pay an entry fee to use these facilities. In a pool, people would pay an entry fee. It's all very well to say that heated facilities are 40 minutes away either side of Beechworth, but I don't think that's good enough. And we noticed that in the Border Mail that the Shire Council is conducting a review of all pools in the Shire, and we ask that a heated or hydrotherapy pool be considered as an urgent part of this review. In rural Alexandria, the Aquatic Centre is supported by 15 community groups who consider their pool is a good community project. And there's no reason why we couldn't do something similar where you could have great support from various people in the community on such a pool. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Barb. On item 11.2, we're going to be discussing the draft pools development plan, which will go out for community consultation, and we'll take the matters you've raised on board. Thanks very much. Item 6, do we have any condolences? Item 7. The recommendation is that Council confirm the minutes of the ordinary Council meeting held on the 27th of August 2019 as published on Council's website, and confirm the minutes of the confidential session held on the 27th of August 2019 as distributed separately. Would somebody like to move that recommendation? Moved by Councillor Shepherd, seconded by Councillor Murdoch. Councillor Shepherd? No, Councillor Murdoch? No. Is anybody against the motion? Carried. Item 8.1 is a question taken on notice. The question was to the Director of Corporate Services, and the written response is in the Council minutes and in the agenda of this. Item 8.2 is response to a petition regarding the installation of streetlights. Council is obtaining quotes from AusNet for the lighting and will consider applying for grant funding. There's a response from Paul McLaughlin, who's the Manager Assets and Property. That's in the current agenda, and I presume, CEO, it's in the minutes of the last meeting? It's in the agenda of this one.
Yeah.
Item 8.3 is response to a petition regarding a reduction of speed limits. The request was for Racecourse Road, Yakandanda, and speed zone change.
Mr Mayor, I'd just like to make a comment on that if I could.
Councillor Trenery.
Been a quick response, and if you see something on Facebook, it's obviously real, but on Facebook, I haven't had a chance to have a look, but the speed limit's actually been changed already. So, and I know there was council staff working on that prior to this, but it's certainly efficient work by council to get that done. Well done.
Good work. Thank you, Councillor. Item number 9, do we have any deputations and petitions? Item 10.1, the recommendation is the Council accepts the August 2019 finance report. Would somebody like to move that recommendation? Councillor Goldsworthy, seconder. Councillor Trenery, Councillor Goldsworthy.
Just to say that it is still fairly early in the piece, and things are looking reasonably well so far. One comment I'd like to make in relation to an item that's in there around things that have been done recently, and that's around the Yakandanda Skate Park. It's been a long time in progress. There was certainly a lot of community consultation and some angst around it. If you look at the finished product, it's very well utilised already. We just need to get the landscaping squared away. But at the moment, it looks like a great facility for the young people in the Indigo Shire, and specifically for Yakandanda.
Okay, Councillor Trenery.
Just a few things of note. I think there'll be probably, and there has been questions in regards to the capital works and the line that's there. Obviously, that's going to be adjusted into the future, but I think it's also, and the line represents how much work's going to be done over a certain period of time. And there's also going to be, as long as subject to council decision, an increase in capital works that'll represent up to $14 million, which I think will be fantastic if we get that sort of level of production done, work done. The other thing too, I do have a question actually in regards to the waste management service, and this is a question without notice, so I'm happy to have an answer later on, but there's a $48,000 favourable result. Is that favourable or not favourable result from the waste management service? Yeah, sorry, page 11. If that's okay through the chair to...
The CEO might be able to assist there, Greg. CEO?
Yeah, so there's been an increase in the number of services, actual services compared to the budget, which will be mainly due to new services, but it doesn't flow through the bottom line because that also means an increase in the cost of servicing those properties. So there'll be extra cost, extra revenue, but also extra cost to service those. So waste management is generally, or basically, a break-even service.
Thank you. Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
Would anybody else like to speak to the motion? Councillor Goldsworthy.
Just on that point, there is a $59,000 increase in the budget due to supplementary valuations, which is always a good thing. So, yeah, we're tracking well so far.
Is anybody against the motion? Carried. Item 10.2, the recommendation is that Council, pursuant to section 132(2) of the Local Government Act 1989, approves in principle the 2018-2019 performance statement and financial statements, and 2, nominates in accordance with section 132(5) of the Local Government Act 1989 3 councillors, being Councillors Goldsworthy, Murdoch and Trennery, as signatories with authorisation given for any 2 of the nominated 3 councillors to certify the 2018-2019 performance statement and financial statements, along with the CEO and Principal Accounting Officer, in their final form after any changes recommended or agreed to by the auditor have been made. Would somebody like to move that recommendation? Moved by Councillor Goldsworthy, seconded by Councillor Murdoch. Councillor Goldsworthy.
First of all, I'd like to say thank you to the Chief Financial Officer. You've done a great job again this year, Phil, so thank you. And to the department head and the CEO. The budget does look, the report from last year is very, very good. We've achieved a fair bit and we're certainly financially in a pretty good shape. So going forward, I think it bodes well for the Shire. I think it's always important to recall that some of the federal assistance grants are paid over, or some are prepaid and some are invariably this year will probably be after the budget, so that there's a federal budget surplus, but take it over 2 years, because in 1 year you might have a deficit and another you might have might be in front. So I think if we take a 2-year view of this, we've done pretty well.
Councillor Murdoch. Would anybody else like to speak to the motion? I'd just like to say that the annual performance statement and financial statements were overseen by the Audit Committee. The Audit Committee met with the representative of the Victorian Auditor General, the external auditor, who gave the tick of approval. I'd just like to say that the representative from the Victoria Auditor General spoke in high regard of the Councillor, was it Manager of Risk and Finance, Phil Garoni, and the finance team of Indigo Shire Council. Would anybody else like to speak to the motion? Councillor Goldsworthy. Is anybody against the motion? Carried. Item 10.3, the recommendation is the Council adopts the attached Audit Committee Charter 2019. Somebody like to move by Councillor Price, seconded by Councillor Shepherd. Councillor Price.
Yes, Mr Mayor, this is just changing the meeting schedule for the year. The changes are listed in the agenda.
Councillor Shepherd.
I think it's operational, and when the dates were changed, there was also an opportunity to go through the charter and just check that that charter does match the what's expected of us from the state government point of view, and it was all signed off, done, ticked, and it's been to the audit committee and they've agreed with it too. So, thank you.
Would anybody else like to speak to the motion? Councillor Price.
Yeah, just to say that the committee's reviewed it and sent it to us for approval.
Is anybody against the motion? Carried. Item 10.4 is fairly lengthy, but I think it's a very important recommendation, so I will read it. The recommendation is that Council, in relation to planning permit PP 160035, 1.1, notes the advice provided in relation to planning permit and the request made on the 11th of April 2019 to extend the permit. 1.2 notes that a Section 173 agreement setting out the agreed timelines for the construction of the works shown in the approved engineering construction plans for 94 Indigo Creek Road has been executed by the applicant and can be recorded on the title once executed by Council. 1.3, directs officers to arrange for the permit extension with a revised expiry date of 5 July 2020. The permit extension will also include endorsed plans showing roadworks. 1.4 authorises the signing and sealing of the Section 173 agreement referred to in recommendation 1.2 above. 2, in relation to the fuel cell at 94 Indigo Creek Road, Indigo Valley, that Council supports the lodging of an application for an enforcement order pursuant to Section 114 of the Planning and Environment Act 1987 with VCAT. The order is to seek the removal of the fuel cell and supporting infrastructure as currently installed at 94 Indigo Creek Road. Would somebody like to move that recommendation? Moved by Councillor Goldsworthy, seconded by Councillor O'Connor. Councillor Goldsworthy.
This has been something that we've been looking at for a number of years with concerns expressed at the previous location where this applicant was running his business. We've reasonably asked that the business be located where it currently is. We've tried to work with the applicant in relation to this. We're keen to see resolution to have less trucks going through the Barnawatha township, and this is part of that. The concern that we do have is that it hasn't complied with all the conditions of the permit that was initially issued. So I'm just looking to see that the roadworks that we've required previously are completed, that the correct offsets for any buildings, and that we get rid of the fuel sales to the public. I think with working with this applicant, we can have an agreeable outcome both for the community and for himself.
Councillor O'Connor.
I am happy to support this recommendation for two reasons. One is that it makes it very clear that the site be improved in accordance with the original planning permit and sets timelines and dates and conditions on that to make sure that happens, which to date hasn't happened. And secondly, that it does require the removal of the fuel cell according to the VCAT findings. And I think it sends a very clear message that it is not acceptable in Indigo Shire for people to simply go ahead and install a fuel station without even seeking a planning permit. It's absolutely unacceptable, and we will take action if that kind of behaviour occurs.
Would anybody else like to speak to the motion?
I have a question,
Trenery.
either to the mover or someone in the staff. I've been approached by emergency service personnel in regards to using that fuel cell, and I was wondering if there's an opportunity, all things being correct and all the regulations being met, whether there might be an opportunity around Barnawatha at a later stage for a fuel cell to be placed there.
Greg Pinkerton.
So the answer is that the two things are separated. The decision on whether a fuel cell is permitted in there is one question, and that's, as Councillor O'Connor has mentioned, there isn't the permits at this stage. If down the track there was permits issued that allowed a fuel cell and access to other people to use it, then the second question comes in, which is what you're asking, and therefore emergency services or others would be able to use that. But the first part needs to be done as a matter of priority, sort out whether a fuel cell should even be there, and clearly the answer is no at the moment.
Would anybody else like to speak to the motion? Councillor Goldsworthy. Is anybody against the motion? Carried. Item 10.5, the recommendation is that Council accepts the attached assembly of council records. Would somebody like to move that recommendation? Moved by Councillor Price, seconded by Councillor Murdoch. Councillor Price.
Just procedural, Mr Mayor, to present to Council each month.
Councillor Murdoch. Would anybody else like to speak to the motion? Is anybody against the motion? Carried. Item 10.6, the recommendation is the council notes the Kew Springs Water Extraction Facility monitoring report content and the action undertaken where required. Would somebody like to move that recommendation? Councillor Shepherd, seconded by Councillor O'Connor. Councillor Shepherd.
Again, we have that as a standing item in our agenda to keep an eye on what's happening with Kew Springs.
Councillor O'Connor. Is anybody against the motion? Carried. Item 11.1, the recommendation is the council endorses the draft Chiltern Connectivity Plan and places the draft plan on public exhibition for a period of 30 days. Somebody like to move that recommendation? Moved by Councillor Price, seconded by Councillor Murdoch. Councillor Price.
So this is yet another outcome from the placemaking plan. It's already had some consultation with the community, with the schools, and 2 community drop-in sessions that's resulted in this plan being put together. Now we're putting it out for 30 days, and I encourage groups within the town as well as individuals to consider the plan so that we can really shore this up as a really good basis for a strategic document for us to take to say these are the linkages in Chiltern that the townspeople require. Already we've got an officer attending some of the community meetings of our community groups to discuss with them the plan, to talk through it. So I really encourage people to give their feedback and for this to just be another piece in us making our way through the Chiltern placemaking plan.
Councillor Murdoch. Would anybody else like to speak to the motion? Councillor Price. To sum up, no. Is anybody against the motion? Carried. Item 11.2, the recommendation is the council endorses the draft Pools Development Plan for further community engagement and that it be returned to the December 2019 council meeting. Would somebody like to move that recommendation? Councillor Goldsworthy, seconded by Councillor O'Connor. Councillor Goldsworthy.
Look, I'm really pleased with this. Not only are our swimming pools an important social place for our people that live and visit our community to be, it's an important life skill to be able to swim well. I think we'll get plenty of feedback on it. There's lots of good suggestions in here. I believe that with the changing climate, we can look at some of our waterways will probably be more affected by blue-green algae during our summers, and our pools will become more and more important. There'll be cool relief places during those hot days. We have to have a series of good swimming pools. In relation to the Beechworth swimming pool, something that was built in the 1970s, it hasn't lasted the journey. It needs to be replaced and we need to plan for it. And this is the first indication that council is really looking to plan for the replacement of that pool. So I commend it to this council and to the community to make some worthwhile submissions in relation to it.
Councillor O'Connor.
Yeah, I'd endorse what Councillor Goldsworthy is saying, and I think this is a really great opportunity, given the issue that was raised today, for you to, for your group, to really push for your support for a hydrotherapy pool, or a heated pool. But I will say, out of our own current budget, we wouldn't be able to fund that ourselves. So what we really need is a lot of community pressure to say to the government, state government, we need support for this, we need grants, we need funding, and the more the community backs us on that, the more opportunity we'll have to be able to see it come to fruition, because I think, we'd all love to see something like that happen here. Have to go through the mayor.
Would anybody else like to speak?
So so I would support that. So please, put in your submissions and get as many people as you can to support it.
I'd just like, sorry. No, the letter from Barb you'd like to support, is that right? Yeah. Yeah. I'd just like to say regarding the hydrology side of that, hydrotherapy, the CEO and I will certainly be talking to Beechworth Health. It has been discussed before and didn't come to any conclusion, but there's always ways of forming partnerships, and then it might go to the Department of Health. There's a variety of things that can be looked at, and we'll certainly look at this letter, which talks about that pool and the heated pool. Councillor Goldsworthy. Councillor Shepherd.
I just wanted to point out that we're also looking to investigate funding to install accessible pool hoists incrementally across all pools over the next 5 years, and I think that's a really great addition to this, that we're going to make our pools even more accessible. So that's I thought that was a great recommendation.
Would anybody else like to speak to the motion? Councillor Goldsworthy.
I think we'll get lots of good ideas. It's already full of good ideas. The big issue will be how we pay for it, but this is a really good start.
Is anybody against the motion? Carried. Item 11.3, the recommendation is that Council adopts the Beechworth Railway Precinct Land Management Plan, July 2019. Someone like to move that recommendation? Moved by Councillor Shepherd, seconded by Councillor Price. Councillor Shepherd.
This has come back to council having been out for an exhibition period, and it's really a planning strategy to look at that whole area to guide the future development of that precinct and to make it a vibrant and activated recreation and tourism precinct, whilst also paying attention, of course, to the historical significance. So it's been out to the community, it's been supported, it's just come back for us to ratify.
Councillor Price.
Yeah, just to thank those people that did make a submission. We realised that this is a significant site for the town, and therefore that's why we sought your input.
Would anybody else like to speak to the motion? I've got a question for the Director of Community Development. It talks about the goods shed. The community are just wondering where that's up to. It seems that we've had an extension regarding the grant from the federal government. Where's the goods shed up to?
The goods shed is been subject to an expression of interest for potential business operators. The allocation of that shed to a potential business operator has been delayed whilst we confirm the project scope and cost of the refurbishment. So we're working through that with construction experts, etc. So there's a bit of time to go yet before that is concluded.
The report also talks about the old Beechworth Library. I see there's a sign up that it's up for lease. Could you just, a very brief, where's that up to?
You're correct, yes. So the council made the decision to seek a lease tenant at a commercial rate for that building. That process is closed, and council's internal panel will now make an assessment of those submissions.
Thank you. Councillor Shepherd.
Just when you look at the submissions, most of the things were noted or things were changed and updated. So just like to congratulate the community on their feedback. It makes a real difference to have your input, and look forward to seeing this railway precinct develop.
Is anybody against the motion? Carried. Item 12.1, the recommendation is that council endorses the Municipal Fire Management Plan 2019-2022. Would somebody like to move that recommendation? Moved by Councillor O'Connor, seconded by Councillor Shepherd. Councillor O'Connor.
I think given the absolutely frightening prospect of fire in our Shire with the impact of climate change, and we declared a climate emergency at the last meeting, I'm very pleased to support this plan. It's been developed by those that have the knowledge, the emergency services participants, It's what they need to be able to get on with protecting us as best they can. And I do think it is important to acknowledge it in the context that, as it says in the report, the changing climate will continue to increase the likelihood of extreme weather events and the associated fire risk. So this is extremely important, and I want to thank the people that had the time that was put into developing this report and for putting it into that context.
Thank you. Councillor Shepherd.
Doctor Who.
No, you're right.
I'm a member of that committee and I note how hard they worked at getting this report done. It is a functional document where when there's a fire, each one of those committee members and the departments they represent know exactly where they're meant to be and what they're meant to do. And I'd just like to congratulate Chris Rule on his role in bringing this together. I still am always a little bit concerned at how much opportunity the community has to be involved at this level, but I get, and I'm constantly told by them that this is an operational document and it needs to be very, strategic. They need to know exactly what they're going to be doing next. But I look forward to the time, I think, when the community also has a spot in that planning.
Would anybody else like to speak to the motion? Councillor Price.
Just to say that I think the community can have a level of confidence in the major stakeholders that are involved, that it's Indigo, Shire, Vic Police, CFA, Parks, DELP, Hancock, Victoria Plantations, and that the consultation has also been conducted with Telstra, North East Water, SPLsnet, SES, Digita and Department of Education and Training. So I think that makes it a very comprehensive plan.
I'll probably just comment on the comment that Councillor Shepherd made, which is that we do want community to have input, and in a sense that's when we are representatives on those committees as councillors, we are trying to represent you. So make sure you let us know what you think, because we can't always have everybody at the table. So it does just remind me that, we are there as your representatives. Please use us that way as well for having input into everything from swimming pools to emergency management plans. Yeah.
Is anybody against the motion? Carried. Item 12.2, the recommendation is that Council notes the eligibility of infrastructure recovery works from the December 2018 storm event for funding to be provided under the Natural Disaster Financial Assistance Program. The Council, subject to approval of works under this contract by the Department of Treasury and Finance, awards Contract 19-14817 for December 2018 storm damage rehabilitation to Jackson's Earth-Moving Proprietary Limited for the tendered value of $438,379 excluding GST, and authorises the CEO to sign the contract documents and affix the Council's common seal. Would somebody like?
I just have a question.
Councillor Goldsworthy, question 4.
Yeah, possibly for you. Would we be better off leaving this until the end of the meeting so that we can go into a confidential sitting to discuss it? I get that there may not be much discussion, but should that be a process? Because it is a confidential attachment, that's all.
The CEO might be able to answer that for you. I'm not quite sure, now that it's in the public arena, why it would become a confidential issue, unless you're talking about the other tenders.
It's merely a process because I don't think there'll be much discussion, but I wouldn't want to preclude discussion because it is a confidential item and a confidential attachment that we have.
CEO?
Thanks, Mr Mayor. The reason we've structured it this way is to try and maximise the amount of debate, discussion that we can have in the open forum. And so by separating out some of the commercial in confidence elements of the bids in the confidential section, but having everything else in the open session that provides for the most amount of public disclosure and transparency. So it could go in confidential, it just means another item decided in confidential, that probably could be out in the open session. The thinking was then that if a councillor flagged that perhaps they did want to discuss the attachments in detail, they could, and as you say, if you felt like you wanted to do that, you could say, well, let's hear that in confidential. But unless any councillor wanted to go through the details of those, they've all had access to them, whether you want to debate them. If any councillor wanted to debate them, you can flag that now and go into confidential. Otherwise, we can just stay in open forum and consider it there.
Okay, Councillor Goldsworthy, would you like to move a motion that we move this into confidential?
After that question, actually, no. I'm happy to move the motion. I just felt that given it had confidential elements to it, it was going to be difficult to discuss. But I'm actually happy to move the motion as it stands.
Would somebody like to second that? Seconded by Councillor Murdoch. Councillor Goldsworthy.
I'd almost like to say about time. It's this was a result of a flood back in the middle of December. It has taken forever, and I'm just glad that it's happening. The one comment I will make about the tender and the value is there's a wide fluctuation in relation to it, and you just wonder how some companies operate, whether they're looking to rip the Shire off and the people within it, or whether we're getting good value for this. But certainly it was the best of the tenders that were offered.
Perhaps it's good that those tender documents are in confidential. Councillor Murdoch.
Well, I just think that it's good that we've got this in motion now, because, you know, there is rehabilitation to be done and we want to get it done as soon as we can, but we have to go through the processes first, and getting money from other sources is always a good one.
Would somebody else like to speak to the motion? Councillor Shepherd.
Again, in not being able to speak about the details, but I do appreciate having a weighted framework, a process that we can see exactly why we ended up with the group we ended up with. So I really appreciate that our staff do have very much an objective viewpoint and framework for us to look at, to see the weights of each of those particular concerns, like cost and how long the business has been doing that particular work, how effective they've been, all those different list of priorities, and it's good to have it there, so it's very much an objective viewpoint.
Would anybody else like to speak to the motion? Councillor Goldsworthy, to sum up.
I'm really keen to see those roads that have been impacted by the damage fixed. I think going forward from here, it is important to note that other infrastructure like our cycle paths won't be available. We can't be fixed via this sort of funding. So there are ongoing issues with funding, but I'm glad to see that our roads will finally be fixed. And unfortunately, it has to be done by an outside contractor to comply with the grant process.
Is anybody against the motion? Carried. Item 12.3. The recommendation is the Council notes the submission received regarding the draft resource recovery and waste management strategy and endorses the officer comments. And 2, adopts the resource recovery and waste management strategy 2019. Somebody like to move that recommendation? Moved by Councillor Shepherd, seconded by Councillor Price. Councillor Shepherd.
We're a Shire that are concerned about waste. We've historically performed with the third highest landfill diversion rate in the state at 66%. And we have a really engaged community. And so this framework, this has come down to just a few pages really, but the amount of work that went into it was quite huge. And I think quite a few, I can't remember the number of people that had fed back into the waste management strategy, but there was a lot of feedback and a lot of people's opinions. The summary in here comes down to a few areas. So in hard waste disposal, we're getting rid of our hard waste disposal, but giving 2 vouchers that you would have already received on your rates notice to replace the hard waste weekends. We've got the provision of a green waste disposal weekend in October at Beechworth and Rutherglen. We've got increasing education to improve household waste behaviours, and continuous development at the transfer stations to improve waste and resource recovery operations. Now that's just at the bare minimum. There is a huge list of different ways that we're going to be approaching waste in the Shire, and I recommend that you read this document.
Thank you, Councillor Price.
Just on the format of the document, I think it's appropriate to highlight how it's been developed. It's a process and template that has been used by other groups and now is being used by our North East Waste and Recovery group. So I think it's important to have an accessible template that we can use and fill in for our local needs. I think it's an important discussion at the moment. Everyone's talking about the recycling sector and the challenges that we're facing. And it's important for us to spell that out to the community, just what those challenges are and our role to play in them, because residents quite often want a higher level of service to do with our waste, but don't necessarily want to pay the cost that is associated with it. So it's an interesting discussion to be had. And I thank the staff that have put a lot of work into this, and happy to see it adopted.
Would anybody else like to speak to the motion? Councillor Goldsworthy, then Councillor Trenery.
I do have some concerns about just a couple of items. I recognise that this is a really good document, and I do support it. I'm willing to give it a time to see how it works, but I have concern about discontinuing the hard waste weekends. I see the upsides in that it's improved safety and it aligns more closely with what we're trying to achieve as a council, and there will be a cost saving in relation to it. And I hope that the 2 vouchers that are given to people with their rates works well, but there's definitely a downside to it too, and I think we'll know more about that in the next year or so. My other concern around the document is it just talks about if there's a grant process for an event that we require from the event organisers an approved waste management plan, and I just wouldn't want to see that be too onerous on the committees, because I see that it's hard enough to get volunteers to do things, and if we're trying to get them to dispose of waste in a particular way or increase the people power that's required, it could have an adverse impact, significant adverse impact on some of the events that we have and their ongoing viability.
Councillor Trenery.
I've got a few questions in regards to the hard waste. The fact that we're reducing services in Yakandanda and moving it partly to Beechworth, and the green waste reduction, so reducing that service to that side of the Shire, are we reducing what we charge the community? In considering what the Ombudsman's report was in regards to overcharging for these fees?
The Director, Infrastructure.
No, so the answer is no. So I think if you look at the table in the back of the strategy where all the costs are, there's some cost savings against some of those service areas, so particularly in the hard waste by not running the weekends, but there's other areas probably such as education and get better messaging out there around waste diversion and the like, just to cite a couple, but it's probably cost neutral, I think, overall.
Given that 70% of people that were interviewed or were questioned about this want the hard waste service, and only 29% of those people had never used it, the ongoing customer satisfaction, if it is changed, do we have options to bring this back in if, as we say in the report, that we'll be monitoring customer satisfaction? Do we have the capability to bring this back in at a later stage?
Yeah, look, council ultimately are in charge of the services we deliver, so we've put this recommendation forward, but at any time in the future, council reserve that right to change that. Just a comment on the percentages. So within the survey of those people who had used it, yeah, there was obviously a strong want to retain it, and that's the 70% you mentioned. But the figures of usage, the number of properties or attendees at those weekends totals about, I think it was 7% of the rateable property. So it's a pretty small uptake for the rates notices or vouchers that we distribute.
There was over 400 people that used it, so it's obviously used quite well. What options do we have now? The community used to go out and collect things from seniors in the community on these weekends, and a cube metre voucher is not going to cut it. What options do we have now for community to go collect waste for those that don't have trailers, those that are senior, that can't do anything about it and go to the tip? What options are we offering our community? Happy for either the mover to probably go through the mover first, and then staff.
They're going to be able to contact the council, and there will be a collection. They'll be able to use their voucher. That's correct? Is it? You're flashing green too.
No, look, at the moment we're not offering a collection service, but we've issued two vouchers and saying to people that in addition to the Beechworth and Rutherglen transfer stations, we've got reciprocal rights, or people with the vouchers do, at Tallangatta and Wodonga. So the opportunities for people to dispose of their waste sort of occur year round at those four sites at least.
Sorry, I thought that we discussed that was an option, but obviously I've just made that up. Be nice if it happened, eh?
You'll find that there was other councils that offer that as a service. We do not. I'm really concerned about this. I don't think there's been solutions. I think there'll be increased dumping in our community. I've never ever voted against any major policy item on this council in 7 years, but I am that disappointed with the lack of community consultation, the lack of understanding. I walked down the street of Yackandan and no one knew this was happening. No one knew these services were going to be taken away from them. Everyone's absolutely amazed that the green waste service is going to be removed from Yackandan leading into a fire season. It's ridiculous. I will listen to what everyone says, but it's going to take a lot to convince me to vote for this policy.
Would anybody else like to speak to the motion? You'll have your chance to sum up shortly. Councillor O'Connor?
I guess I just want to take the opportunity to remind us all that this really is dealing with what happens when we need to collect waste and then how we deal with that. But there are two things we can all do before we get to that point, which is to avoid creating waste in the first place and to reuse as much as we can. So those reduce and reuse are the two principles that are our own responsibility, because as you can see from the discussion tonight, the actual impact of collecting, transferring, managing and dealing with waste is actually an enormous burden on councils, and the system is falling over at the moment, and not to mention the methane that is then released from landfills and all of the other ongoing concerns environmentally. So I think, ultimately, the less waste we create, the better. And I think while this policy deals with what is created, I am going to take tonight as an opportunity just to remind us all to do our bit in trying to reduce that as much as possible.
Would anybody else like to speak to the motion? Councillor Shepherd.
Councillor Chenery, I understand your concerns about the green waste at Yakandanda as well, and perhaps that's something we need to look at, as you say, throughout the year, especially when we talk about, we've just passed our fire management plan, we're talking about green waste and people being able to move it out and get it away. At the moment, you can use Beechworth and Rutherglen and Wodonga. So, and Tallangatta. So we'll see how we go with those centres. But I understand your concern around the hard waste finishing. As we said, 7% of people use it, and again, something that we'll trial and see whether I think I've heard that people have been very happy with the 2 vouchers and the opportunities to use those instead. And the waste management plan, I really commend this piece of work on having a waste management plan. I understand your concerns about volunteers, but I think we have an opportunity to work with community groups on setting up a waste management plan that fits in with our plastic wise policy and this strategy as well. And I suggest that that's going to be a way of us being able to educate and change the way people work within the Shire.
All those in favour of the motion? Against? If you've abstained, Councillor Goldsworthy, you've got to give a reason why you've abstained. You have? Sorry? Oh, well, I was going to call for it anyway. All those in favour? Councillor Shepherd, Goldsworthy, Gaffney, Murdoch, Price, O'Connor. Against? Trenery. Councillor Trenery. We were heading for a clean sweep, but... Item 13.1, the recommendation is the Council receives the attached unconfirmed advisory committee minutes and endorses the officer's comments. Would somebody like to move it? Moved by Councillor Price, seconded by Councillor Murdoch. Councillor Price.
Just to highlight the work of the Access Committee as is listed within the report, they did a site visit to Lake King to check on the works that have been done there, and they made some suggestions for accessibility improvements. And I think that's just great that we're able to put that lens over some of the projects that we're doing across the Shire, that we've got this group that we can go to and say, can you please come and have a look at it from a different perspective than may have been included originally, and thank them for their work and thank them for going out to Lake King.
Councillor Murdoch.
I'd like to endorse Councillor O'Connor's words, because really we're pretty lucky in this area, in this Shire, that we have such a lot of volunteers and they put in a lot of time to help us with what we're doing. So this is just another one of those things that happen here.
Would anybody else like to speak to the motion? Councillor Price. Is there anybody against the motion? Carried. Item 13.2, the recommendation is that Council adopts the election period policy 2019. Would somebody like to move that recommendation? Moved by Councillor O'Connor, seconded by Councillor Trenery. Councillor O'Connor.
Just to say that this is just making it very clear about what the conditions are when we are in an election period for local government, and what's allowed and not allowed for candidates and current councillors. So yeah, it's just guidance for us all. Thank you.
Councillor Trenery.
Oh, sorry.
I just concur with Councillor O'Connor. It's very important that we as councillors don't take advantage of that for those that are competing against us. And I think this highlights ways on which it ends up being a fair playing field, and I think that's very important. And I'm sure everyone's looking forward to the elections.
This council goes into caretaker mode on the 22nd of September, and the council election will be the 24th of October. I'd just like to say to all of those people who have told me they're going to stand for council in 2020, I'm looking forward to them standing. Would anybody else like to speak to the motion? Is anybody against the motion? Carried. Item 13.2, the recommendation is the council appoints the Director of Community and Economic Development, Mark Florence, as Acting Chief Executive Officer for the period 27 September to 4th October 2019 inclusive, and that Mr Florence be authorised to exercise all powers and authorities reposed in the position of Chief Executive Officer for the period of the appointment as Acting Chief Executive Officer. Would somebody like to move that recommendation? Moved by Councillor Trenery, seconded by Councillor Goldsworthy. Councillor Trenery.
This is fairly administrative, but needs to be done. Obviously, the CEO carries powers, and if something does happen while he's away, I'm sure Mr Florence, as it's put here, will do a fantastic job.
Would anybody else like to speak to the motion? Is anybody against the motion? Carried. Item 15.1 is the Mayor's Diary. Any questions? Item 6.
Just as a matter of interest, do you mind if I just comment on the farewell to the Long-Term Visitor Information Centre Manager, Penny McGregor? She has been here for an enormous time, so I think she must have been just part of the furniture, but she's done a fantastic job. So it's great to see that, you know, we do get some retirement too and a bit of time for themselves. So it's great.
Thank you, Councillor Murdoch. Item 16.1, the decisions registers for information. Item 17, general business.
I don't know whether it's the right time to move it, but I'd like to move an urgent motion. It's that council directs the lease decision for the old Shire Library in Albert Road to be brought back to council for consideration.
So you're asking that that be regarded as urgent business. So I'll take that as that you've moved a motion. Would somebody like to second that? Seconded by Councillor Trenery. Councillor Goldsworthy.
I believe that this is urgent business, given that initially it was delegated to the CEO to enter into a lease agreement with further information that there are a number of parties that are involved in it. There's a long history within council for councillors making the decision in relation to lease decisions. I believe it should come back with a recommendation from the staff. The reason why I think it's urgent is because it should be done in a timely manner. We know that the submissions have been made. If we delay it for a notice of motion by council at the next meeting, it will be unlikely that the successful tenant would be in before Christmas. We'd like to see it occupied as soon as possible.
Just a question. So councillor had resolved that the CEO would make that decision. So you're asking that that decision of council be rescinded?
Not a rescission in the sense of local law 3, because there's certain timeframes in relation to that. But I am looking that the CEO can still enter and sign the contract, but the decision as to who the the lease is awarded to, I believe, should be a decision of council.
And would that be made in open council, or would you go into confidential?
My expectation that it would be in open council.
Councillor Trenery.
I concur. I mean, this is I think when we first heard about this, it wasn't going to be it wasn't going to be a highly competitive situation. It's getting far more competitive now, and there's getting more and more in the community that are wishing to use this facility. And just the basic principle, I think, if there's going to be a decision made, there's going to be costs involved and a lease that involves the community in one way or another. And I think councillors are here to make decisions like that. I honestly believe that regardless of attempts to lobby or whatever, which has been the question in the past, councils will make the right decision by community. and that's what they've been charged to do, so I think we should do it.
Would anybody else like to speak to the motion? Councillor Shepherd.
I am a little concerned about debating that in an open forum around people who may have applied to lease that building. I understand the issue that you have around perhaps bringing it to the representative group to discuss, but I think I'd prefer if that was done at a confidential discussion that we then brought back with an outcome to the community.
Councillor O'Connor.
Yeah, I agree with Councillor Shepherd. My concern about that is that if we went through an ordinary process of leasing a property, people would apply to the estate agent. People don't know who the other applicants are. They don't know what they're offering. I don't think it is appropriate for us to be putting that into an open discussion. It's people's own private businesses, and we don't. They may not want the community to know that they've put in a bid if they're not successful. So, on that basis, unless it's confidential, then I don't support the motion.
Oh, I was going to say if the mover's happy with it, I'm happy with it, to go into confidential, as long as it's obviously brought out at the end of that.
Would anybody else like to speak to the motion? Councillor Price.
Just to say that I think the emphasis was different when we first considered this motion. We were talking about whether it be a community space or a commercial space, and so that's why I think that the discussion has changed, and now we look to be more across the decision. But I'm happy to support that it come to council in a confidential format and then to be released, because I think that the community does expect that we have some oversight of a decision like this.
Would anybody else like to speak to the motion? Just before we go on, that motion was that this be accepted as urgent business. So I'll take a vote on that, and then I'll give you a chance to sum up, Councillor Goldsworthy, and then we'll go on for the normal vote. Is everybody happy with that? Yep. Councillor Goldsworthy.
So just in line with what's been spoken, I do believe it's incumbent on us to make a decision that it should be sooner rather than later, and it should be by council, so it is urgent business that we consider.
So with the motion that this be accepted as urgent business, all those in favour? Now I'll put the motion that the council decide. Do you want to read that motion back?
I can.
Perhaps the executive officer would like to read it.
The council directs the lease decision for the old Shire Library in Albert Road to be brought back to council for consideration. So, well, there wasn't that wasn't part of the original motion, but I would like to speak to that. I haven't actually been able to speak to that component of it.
So you'll make that part of the motion, whether it's confidential or in open council?
Well, my reason, well, I would have said it doesn't need to be. I would have thought it was a decision of the CEO and it will come back in confidential. I think that's blatantly obvious. I don't know that it needs to be in the motion, but if it has to be in the motion, then I don't mind it being in the motion. I think it's obvious it's confidential.
So it'll be in the motion. So that's the motion. Is anybody against the motion? Carried.
So, well, but we had a motion for urgency, which I second. Who seconded that motion just then? Well, I thought we were talking about urgency, so we might have. I'm happy to claim both.
Congratulations.
I've got Councillor Goldsworthy moving both and Councillor Trenery seconding both. If I can write the minutes down as that way, if you're happy with that, that's what we'll do.
I'm absolutely ecstatic about that, CEO.
Thank you.
So we'll continue with general business, Councillor Trenery. Councillor Shepherd. Councillor Goldsworthy? Councillor O'Connor, yes.
Yes, I do. At the last meeting, we declared a climate emergency, and part of that motion was that as a member of Rural Victoria, the Board of Rural Councils Victoria, that I would request support for that motion from that organisation. I took it to the organisation. They did not support the climate emergency motion. They did, however, support one of the aspects of that, which was that we would be lobbying the state government to allow local governments to access the Emergency Management Fund in advance to prepare infrastructure and services for impending disasters as a result of climate change. So they do want to lobby for that because they fully support the idea that councils need to be prepared for for disasters and emergencies in advance rather than just getting money after they've happened. But they did not support the requested motion to support our declaration of a climate emergency. So as a result of that, I'm considering my position in relation to remaining on Rural Councils Victoria, and will make an informed decision about that. Will inform council of that decision once I've made up my mind.
Thank you. Councillor Price? Councillor Murdoch? I was just going to ask you one question. How many councils make up Rural Councils Victoria?
So there's 38 councils, and there are 6. They're divided up into 6 regions. So each region is represented by a CEO and a councillor. So there are 12 on the board, 6 CEOs and 6 councillors representing, and we're a representative organisation for all of the 38 small rural councils.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Murdoch? Councillor Shepherd?
I was just reminded that I had a few people tell me how good the 2020 film at Beechworth was, and the 2020, is it 2040? Of course, it's 2020 next year. 2040. I haven't seen it, but they just said it was fantastic. It was supported by Indigo Shire, lots of other community groups involved, and over 100 people attended, and lots of interesting things to see and learn about. So I think there's some more of those happening in the Shire. I think there's one happening in Yakandanda. I don't know where the others are. Are those the films? 2040? One in Rutherglen and one in Yakandanda still to show. So I just wanted to remind people that's happening. I'll get to see one of them.
Councillor Goldsworthy?
Just in the light of that last comment, I'd like to say that the climate emergency strike that Councillor O'Connor and myself and a couple of councillors from Wodonga and Albury attended last Friday at Albury. It was a very good attendance. There are a lot of local people that I recognise from Beechworth and the surrounding areas that attended, and it only drives home the concern that our community has in relation to our ongoing viability on this planet with the way we're burning fossil fuels.
Item 18, the recommendation is that the ordinary meeting of council move into confidential session in accordance with section 89.2H and 89.2D of the Local Government Act. Agenda item 18.1 is the appointment of an independent member of the Audit Committee is designated confidential as it relates to any other matter which the council or special committee considers would prejudice the council or any person. And 18.2, the agenda item 18.2, swimming pools tender is designated confidential as it relates to contractual matters under section 89.2D. Thank you for your attendance. The meeting's not closed. Do we have someone move that motion? Moved by Councillor Murdoch, seconded by Councillor Price. Is anybody against the motion? Carried. We're now moving it into confidential. I now declare the meeting closed. At the time, I just asked that question, Councillor Goldsworthy. The time is 7:45.